This took place a few years ago when I was visiting my parents' home during the summer in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Cheshire, England. It was the kind of place where you wouldn't think twice about leaving your doors unlocked. It was a friendly neighborhood, neighbors waved to each other, kids played outside without a care, and nothing bad ever seemed to happen until it did. I remember sitting at the kitchen table that day, which faces onto the street, my laptop open, just casually working and glancing up occasionally to watch people pass by, walking dogs or strolling with a pram. Everything seemed so normal. Then I saw something moving out the corner of my eye. Two people were walking down the street. At first, I didn't think any of it. The man was wearing a semi-casual suit and the woman was dressed in jeans. But as I kept watching, their movement started to look off. The man's arms were flailing like one of those inflatable tube men you see outside car dealerships. The woman's head was tilted awkwardly to one side, and one of her arms hung at this weird, unnatural angle. It wasn't like how normal people walk. It felt wrong, but I tried to shrug it off. Maybe they were just eccentric or had a medical condition. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I went upstairs to check on my cat. She was lounging peacefully on the windowsill, completely unbothered. From the window, I could see some neighborhood kids playing in the street. Their laughter felt reassuring. It reminded me that I was safe and that this was a good neighborhood. But when I went back downstairs, something felt different. Off. I walked over to the back door and that's when I felt it. The handle was turning. Someone was trying to get in. For a moment I froze, my mind raced, then instinct kicked in. I shoved the door as hard as I could and I screamed at the top of my lungs. The handle stopped moving and everything went quiet. I peeked out the window and saw them. The same man and woman I'd seen earlier running down the driveway. But it wasn't normal running. Their movements were just as bizarre and jerky as before. It made my stomach churn. I told my dad what happened. He rushed over and checked everything, but he dismissed it as misunderstanding, even joking about how people can be strange sometimes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every tiny noise, the creak of the house settling, the rustle of the wind outside, felt amplified. I was on edge. Then just as I started drifting off, I heard a child scream. I bolted out of bed and ran to the window. The neighbor's front door was wide open. Without even thinking, I grabbed my phone and dialed emergency services. Then I ran across the street. I didn't know what I was going to find, but I couldn't just stand by. When I got there, I saw them. The same man and woman, they were inside the house, moving frantically, almost like they were searching for something. The family was huddled together in the corner, terrified. The police arrived not long after, but even they struggled to restrain the intruders. The man was flailing so wildly that it was impossible to handcuff him, and the woman's movements were so erratic, it was like her body was fighting against itself. Thankfully, the family wasn't hurt, but the whole neighborhood learned a hard lesson about locking doors that night. I was in college when this incident happened. For context, at the time I lived with my younger brother and our cat. We lived on the first floor, or the second floor for my American friends, right next to the military camp and a patch of forest that led to a creek. On the back balcony, there was a circular metal ladder that led down to the ground. This ladder connected to our kitchen door, which we always kept under lock and key except for when the cat wanted to go out. We would unlock the door and he'd make his way down the metal stairs to find his cat friends and play. I don't believe in premonitions much, but I do believe in instinct. For quite a while, I'd felt uneasy about that patch of forest behind our apartment. Maybe it was the darkness, there wasn't a single light there, and the outdoor ladder seemed to descend into an abyss. You could take 3 steps into the forest and be completely swallowed by the shadows. Even though I couldn't see anything out there, I felt watched. I didn't have any proof, but something about it was off. I knew it. One day, I got home early from class, which wasn't something I usually did. As I opened the door to my apartment, I called out for my brother, but the house was silent. The only light on was the one in the entryway. casting long shadows down the hallway. I dropped my bag by the door and walked toward my room. That's when I heard it. The sound of a door slamming shut. My brother's door. I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest. I told myself it was probably just the wind. But when I peeked into my room, my stomach dropped. My room was a mess. Clothes and books were scattered everywhere, and my jewelry box was open, its contents gone. Someone had been there. I felt a wave of panic but forced myself to keep moving. I tiptoed down the hall toward my brother's room. I was ready to confront whoever was in there. But when I opened the door, it was empty. The only clue was the balcony door, swinging open in the breeze. I ran outside just in time to see a man jumping off the metal ladder. He hit the ground hard but got up and ran into the forest. I screamed, hoping someone would hear, but the street was empty. The forest swallowed him up within seconds. My brother came home minutes later to find me sobbing. Together we searched the apartment and found a pillowcase filled with stolen items. It looks like the thief had been interrupted and left in a hurry. The police came, dusted for fingerprints, and took our statements, but they didn't seem too optimistic about catching anyone. We moved out not long after. I couldn't stay there, not after knowing how easily someone had violated our space. And even now, I can't shake the memory of that pitch-black forest behind the apartment, and the feeling that something was watching me all along. This was more than 10 years ago when I was a student in South Africa. I used to house sit for extra cash, and one time, a couple asked me to watch their house and their 6-month-old golden retriever while they finished an overseas trip. The original sitter had bailed on them, and they needed someone last minute. They even offered me to pay for the full 2 weeks, even though I'd only be there for 5 days. It sounded perfect. The first 4 nights were uneventful. I watched movies, relaxed in the jacuzzi, and played with a dog. On the last night, the couple called to say their flight had been delayed and asked if I could stay one more night. I said yes, and called my dad to let him know. He asked for the address, which I usually wouldn't give him, but this time I did. And that decision saved my life. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to the sound of breaking glass. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. My heart was racing. I grabbed my phone and hit redial. My dad was the last person I had called. I dropped the phone between the mattress and headboard, hoping he would hear what was going on. Then the door burst open. A man stood there holding a knife. Without thinking, I kicked out with all my strength. Mind you, I'm 6'3" and was about 220 pounds at the time. My kick sent him flying into the wall, and the knife clattered to the floor. Before he could get up, I was on him, driving my knee into his face. He went limp, but before I could catch my breath, another man entered. This one had a gun. He pressed it against my head and ordered me to lie face down on the bed. A blanket was thrown over me as they ransacked the house. I thought I was going to die. Then I heard the noise of screeching tires. My dad's car skidded to a stop outside, and he started yelling at the top of his lungs. Shots rang out. My dad was firing warning shots into the air. The intruders panicked and fled, jumping the fence and disappearing into the night. When it was over, I found the dog outside. She had been poisoned. The police showed up an hour later, but they didn't seem to care much. Months later, they caught the intruders. One of them, a notorious criminal, glared at me during a lineup and made a threatening gesture. Years later, I found out he'd been killed during another home invasion. Justice caught up with him.